So I went into our bedroom and she wasn't there, and that was the first time really that the panic hit. And I just ran back into her bedroom, and literally at that point the curtains, which were closed, just kind of flew open, and that was when I noticed that the window was open as far as it could go and the shutters outside had been raised all the way up.
"55 minutes. That's all it took to transform a family vacation into one of history's most baffling mysteries. 55 minutes between 9:05 p.m. and 10:00 p.m. on May 3, 2007, a window of time riddled with contradictions, changed stories, and sightings that don't align. 55 minutes that have haunted investigators for over a decade and left the world asking, what really happened to Madeleine McCann? Tonight, we're dissecting the timeline that changed everything. The timeline that, when examined closely, exposes inconsistencies so significant they've led detectives down wildly different paths. Some of these contradictions are subtle. A door that was supposedly locked, then unlocked. Others are glaring. Witnesses who should have seen each other but didn't. And one identification that turned the entire case on its head. Before we dive deeper, take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Our criminal instinct community solves these puzzles together, and I'd love to know, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your location in the comments below. The disappearance of 3-year-old Madeleine from her vacation apartment in Portugal sparked what would become the most heavily reported missing person case in modern history. The investigation has cost over $11 million, spanned 3 countries, and generated thousands of leads. Yet despite this unprecedented effort, we still don't have definitive answers. What makes this case so enduring isn't just the heartbreaking image of a little girl vanishing without a trace. It's the nagging sense that the truth is hiding in plain sight, buried in the details of that critical hour. Consider this. Within those 55 minutes, we have Madeleine's father changing his story about which door he used to check on his children. We have a friend claiming to see a man carrying a child away from the apartment, yet somehow remaining invisible to 2 men standing on the same narrow street. And perhaps most perplexing, another family spotting a man carrying a pajama-clad child toward the beach at almost the exact moment Madeleine was discovered missing. These aren't minor discrepancies. They're fundamental contradictions that completely alter our understanding of what happened that night. The timeline matters because timing is everything in a case like this. If Madeleine was taken at 9:15 p.m. as one sighting suggests, the abductor had a 45-minute head start before the alarm was raised. If she was taken closer to 10 p.m., as another sighting indicates, the kidnapper would have had mere minutes to escape, drastically changing the search parameters and suspect pool. But there's an even more troubling possibility that investigators couldn't ignore. What if these timeline inconsistencies weren't mistakes at all, but deliberate attempts to obscure the truth? Tonight, we're going to walk through each minute of that critical window, examining every contradiction and exploring what these discrepancies might reveal. We'll analyze the competing theories these timeline problems have generated, from a planned abduction by a stranger to the controversial possibility that those closest to Madeleine might know more than they've shared. This isn't just about reconstructing a timeline. It's about understanding how these 55 minutes have shaped an investigation that continues to this day, with German authorities now focusing on a new suspect while Portuguese officials remain skeptical. The clock is ticking. The contradictions are mounting. And somewhere in this tangled timeline lies the truth about what happened to Madeleine McCann. Praia da Luz in May 2007 was everything you'd expect from a Portuguese coastal village, a picturesque haven where whitewashed buildings cascaded down gentle slopes toward a crescent-shaped beach. The name itself, Beach of Light, captured its essence, a sun-drenched retreat where the Atlantic sparkled azure blue against golden sand. Tourism had transformed this once sleepy fishing village into a popular destination, particularly for British families seeking affordable Mediterranean-style vacations without venturing too far from home. The weather that week had been mild, but not particularly warm, temperatures hovering around 63 degrees with occasional light rain. May marked the beginning of the tourist season, when the village was starting to awaken from its winter slumber, but wasn't yet crowded with summer visitors. The Ocean Club Resort, spread across several blocks rather than contained in a single complex, blended seamlessly into the village landscape. Apartment 5A stood at a pivotal location within this resort, a ground-floor, two-bedroom unit at the corner of two streets, Rua Dr. Agostinho da Silva at the front and Rua Dr. Francisco Gentil Martins along the side. This corner position meant the apartment was accessible from multiple directions and visible from several vantage points, a double-edged sword for both security and privacy. The layout of Apartment 5A created unique vulnerabilities that would later become central to the investigation. The front door opened directly onto a public street, with no security gate or reception area to monitor who came and went. Inside, immediately to the right of this entrance, was the children's bedroom, where Madeleine slept in a single bed positioned against the wall, with her twin siblings in travel cots placed in the center of the room. At the back of the apartment, sliding glass patio doors led to a small veranda overlooking a public footpath, a swimming pool, and beyond that, the resort's tapas restaurant. These patio doors became a crucial element in the timeline. The McCanns would later claim they left them unlocked to facilitate easier checks on their children while dining. The apartment featured shutters on the windows that could only be opened from the inside, a detail that would spark intense debate when Kate McCann later reported finding them raised. Security experts would note that the ground floor location, multiple access points, and corner position made Apartment 5A particularly exposed compared to other units in the resort. The distance between the apartment and the tapas restaurant where the McCanns dined that evening was deceptively complex. As the crow flies, only about 55 meters, 180 feet separated them. However, the actual walking route required exiting the apartment onto Rua Dr. Agostinho da Silva, walking around to the resort's main entrance, then proceeding through the complex to the restaurant. A journey of approximately 82 meters, 269 feet. This distance created a significant blind spot. While diners at the tapas restaurant could see the top of Apartment 5A, the critical doors and windows remained out of sight, obscured by a waist-high wall and raised pool area. Anyone approaching the apartment from multiple angles would be invisible to those dining at the restaurant. The tapas dinner arrangement itself was unusual for the Ocean Club. The McCanns and their friends, 7 adults collectively known as the Tapas 7, had requested and received special permission to dine together each evening while leaving their children sleeping in their respective apartments. The resort typically encouraged families with young children to use their evening babysitting service or the night creche, but made an exception for this group. The friends devised what they described as a checking system. Throughout dinner, one adult would leave the table approximately every 30 minutes to check on all the children in their respective apartments. This rotation meant each parent would check their own children less frequently, roughly once every hour, with friends checking in between. This arrangement hinged entirely on trust and proximity. The group believed the short distance and frequent checks mitigated any risk. They would later compare it to dining in their own garden at home while children slept upstairs, a comparison that critics found deeply flawed given the public access to the apartments and the inability to hear children calling out from that distance. The scene was set, a family-friendly resort with unexpected security gaps, a checking system with inherent blind spots, and an apartment uniquely positioned at the intersection of public and private space. These elements would combine to create the perfect conditions for what was about to unfold, a disappearance that would exploit every vulnerability in this seemingly idyllic setting. May 3, 2007 began with a troubling question. As Kate helped Madeleine brush her teeth that morning, the almost 4-year-old asked something that would later haunt her parents. "Why didn't you come when my brother and I cried last night?" Kate and Gerry McCann would later recall this moment with particular anguish. The question suggested someone had entered the children's bedroom the previous night, May 2nd, while the parents were again dining at the tapas restaurant. Had an intruder already visited, perhaps conducting a reconnaissance before returning the following night? Or was Madeleine simply referring to normal nighttime stirrings that her parents hadn't heard? The McCanns hadn't noticed anything amiss when they returned to the apartment that evening, but the question planted a seed of retrospective dread. The day itself unfolded with the pleasant rhythm of a family vacation. Weather records show it was slightly warmer than previous days, around 68 degree fires with clear skies. The McCann family ate breakfast together at their apartment before Madeleine and her 2-year-old twin siblings, Sean and Amelie, attended the resort's kids club from 9:30 a.m. until 12:30 p.m. After collecting the children, the family lunched at their apartment and then spent the afternoon at the pool. A photograph taken at 2:29 p.m., the last verified image of Madeleine alive, shows her sitting by the pool with her father and sister, her distinctive right eye with its unique pupil feature clearly visible. Witnesses described seeing Madeleine playing tennis that afternoon, with Kate noting how she'd been really enjoying herself. The children attended the kids' club again from 3:15 p.m. to 5:30 p.m., while Kate went for a jog along the beach and Gerry played tennis with a resort tennis pro. After collecting the children, the family returned to apartment 5A for the evening routine. Kate bathed all 3 children between 6 p.m. and 7 p.m., a detail she would recall with precision. Madeleine was dressed in short-sleeved pink pajamas with an Eeyore motif, featuring long pants with cuffs. The outfit would become instantly recognizable worldwide as images circulated in the days following her disappearance. The bedtime routine proceeded normally. The children had milk and biscuits while Kate read them a story. By all accounts, Madeleine was tired that evening, unsurprising after an active day in the sun. At approximately 7:30 p.m., all 3 children were tucked into bed in the front bedroom of apartment 5A. Madeleine slept in the single bed positioned against the wall nearest to the bedroom door. The twins were placed in travel cots in the middle of the room. Kate would later emphasize how particular she was about the positioning. Madeleine's favorite pink comfort blanket and cuddle cat toy were placed within reach, and she tucked the covers up around her neck just the way her daughter preferred. With the children settled, Kate and Gerry McCann showered and prepared for dinner. They opened a bottle of wine and shared a drink in the apartment while getting ready. At approximately 8:30 p.m., with all 3 children apparently sleeping soundly, they left apartment 5A to join their friends at the tapas restaurant. This departure would become one of the most scrutinized moments in the case. According to their initial statements, the McCanns exited through the patio doors at the rear of the apartment, which they left unlocked to facilitate easier checks throughout the evening. They pulled the door closed but did not lock it. The front door, which opened onto the street, was reportedly locked. As they walked the short distance to the tapas restaurant, the McCanns later claimed they felt completely at ease. The resort felt safe, their children were sleeping peacefully, and they would be checking on them regularly throughout the evening. They had followed this same routine for the previous 4 nights of their vacation without incident. They arrived at the tapas restaurant at approximately 8:35 p.m. and joined their 7 friends at a large outdoor table. The evening began like any other, with conversation, drinks, and the first round of checks on the children scheduled to begin shortly. No one at the table could have imagined that within less than 2 hours, their vacation would transform into a nightmare that would captivate and confound the world for years to come. The 55-minute window between 9:05 p.m. and 10 p.m. on May 3, 2007 contains the most contested and scrutinized timeline in modern criminal history. Every minute, every movement, and every contradiction within this period would eventually shape competing theories about what happened to Madeleine McCann. Let's break it down chronologically, examining what each person claimed to be doing during these critical moments. 8:30 p.m. Final bedtime. By 8:30 p.m., all 3 McCann children were reportedly asleep in the front bedroom of apartment 5A. Kate and Gerry performed one final check before leaving for dinner, ensuring the twins' travel cots were positioned in the middle of the room, and Madeleine was tucked into her bed against the wall nearest the door. According to their statements, they exited through the unlocked patio doors at the rear of the apartment, pulling them closed but not locking them. The couple arrived at the tapas restaurant approximately 5 minutes later, joining their friends who were already seated. Restaurant staff would later confirm the group ordered their first round of drinks at 8:37 p.m., a detail that helps anchor the early part of the timeline with some certainty. 9:05 p.m. Gerry's check, and the first contradiction. At approximately 9:05 p.m., Gerry McCann left the table to perform the first check on his children. What should have been a routine moment would later become the first major contradiction in the timeline. In his initial police statement given on May 4th, just hours after Madeleine's disappearance, Gerry claimed he entered apartment 5A through the front door using his key. He stated he had to unlock the door, which he found secured exactly as they had left it. According to this first account, he checked on the children, found all three sleeping soundly, and then exited through the same front door, locking it behind him. However, in a second interview on May 10th, Gerry changed this crucial detail. He now claimed he had entered through the unlocked patio doors at the rear of the apartment, not the front door as previously stated. This discrepancy was never adequately explained and would later fuel speculation about the reliability of the entire timeline. What remained consistent in both accounts was Gerry's insistence that all three children were present and sleeping normally. He specifically recalled standing in the doorway of the children's bedroom, feeling a sense of pride as he looked at his three sleeping children. He noted the room was exactly as they had left it, with the door open approximately 45 degrees. After completing his check, Gerry exited the apartment and began walking back to the restaurant. It was at this point that he encountered another British holidaymaker, Jeremy Wilkins, who was outside pushing his child in a stroller, attempting to get him to sleep. The two men stopped to chat briefly on Rua Dr. Francisco Gentil Martins, the street running along the side of the McCann apartment. This chance meeting would become crucial in evaluating the next reported sighting. 9:15 p.m., the Jane Tanner sighting and its problems. At approximately 9:15 p.m., Jane Tanner, one of the Tapas 7, left the restaurant to check on her own children. According to her statement, as she walked up Rua Dr. Agostinho da Silva, she observed a man carrying a child walking across the top of the road, moving away from the area of the McCann apartment. Tanner described the man as white, 35-40 years old, of average height and build, wearing beige or light-colored clothing. The child appeared to be wearing light-colored pajamas and was being carried horizontally across the man's arms. Tanner claimed the man was walking hurriedly, but not running. This sighting immediately presented a problem. Tanner stated she walked past Gerry McCann and Jeremy Wilkins, who were still conversing on the street. However, neither Gerry nor Jeremy recalled seeing Jane Tanner pass by, a significant discrepancy given the narrow width of the street and the fact that both men were facing in the direction from which she would have approached. This became known as the invisible witness problem. How could Tanner have seen both men clearly enough to identify them, yet neither man saw her? This contradiction would later cast doubt on the reliability of what became known as the Tanner sighting, for years considered the primary lead in the investigation. 9:39:55 p.m. Matthew Oldfield's check and the Smith family's movements. At approximately 9:30 p.m., Matthew Oldfield, another member of the Tapas 7, volunteered to check on the McCann children while doing his own check. His account would add another layer of complexity to the timeline. According to Oldfield, he entered the McCann apartment through the unlocked patio doors, but did not actually enter the children's bedroom. Instead, he claimed he stood at the doorway and observed the room was quiet. He stated he could see the twins in their travel cots, but couldn't see Madeleine's bed from his position at the door. Assuming all was well because the room was silent, he left without confirming Madeleine's presence. Kate McCann would later express surprise at this approach, questioning how effective such a check could be without visually confirming all children were present. This check, or lack thereof, created a potential 40-minute gap during which no one actually saw Madeleine, between Gerry's 9:05 p.m. check and Kate's later discovery at 10 p.m. Meanwhile, across town, the Irish Smith family, Martin Smith, his wife Mary, son Peter, daughter Eowif, and 5 other family members, were finishing dinner at Dolphin's restaurant. According to their statements, they moved to Kelly's bar at approximately 9 p.m., where they remained until approximately 9:55 p.m. This independent group of witnesses was about to become entangled in the case in a way that would dramatically complicate the timeline. 10 p.m. two pivotal events collide. At approximately 10 p.m., two critical events occurred almost simultaneously in different parts of Praia da Luz, events that would generate the most significant contradiction in the entire timeline. The Smith family, walking back to their apartment after leaving Kelly's bar, claimed they encountered a man carrying a young girl on Rua da Escola Primaria, a street leading toward the beach area, approximately 700 meters from the McCann apartment. Their description was detailed: a white male, 35-40 years old, 5'9", 5'11", tall, with short brown hair, wearing beige trousers. The child was described as female, around 4 years old, with blonde hair, wearing light-colored pajamas, and appearing to be in a deep sleep with her head resting on the man's shoulder. At almost exactly the same moment, Kate McCann left the tapas restaurant to perform her check on the children. Upon entering apartment 5A through the patio doors, she noticed the children's bedroom door was open wider than the 45-degree angle they usually left it. As she went to close it, she felt a draft and realized the window was open with its shutter raised. Kate approached Madeleine's bed and discovered it empty. After searching the apartment, she ran back to the restaurant at approximately 10 p.m., uttering the now famous words, "They've taken her! They've taken her!" The alarm was raised, and the search for Madeleine McCann began, a search that continues to this day. Before we continue analyzing these critical timeline discrepancies, I'm curious, what's the weather like where you're watching from right now? Drop a comment below, letting me know if it's sunny, raining, or somewhere in between. While you're typing, make sure to hit that like button if you're finding this timeline breakdown helpful. Your engagement helps this video reach others who are interested in understanding this case. Now, let's examine why these timeline contradictions matter so much and what they might reveal about what really happened that night. The timeline we've just walked through contains 5 major discrepancies that have fueled debate, shaped investigations, and generated competing theories about Madeleine's disappearance. Each contradiction, when examined closely, raises profound questions about what really happened that night. Let's analyze these inconsistencies one by one, considering their implications for the case. Gerry's changing door story. Front door versus patio doors. The first significant discrepancy involves Gerry McCann's contradictory statements about how he entered apartment 5A during his 9:05 p.m. check. This isn't a minor detail, it's a fundamental change in his account of that critical evening. In his initial statement to Portuguese police on May 4th, just hours after Madeleine's disappearance, Gerry claimed he entered through the front door using his key. This would have required him to walk around to the street-facing entrance, unlock the door, check on the children, then lock the door again upon leaving. 6 days later, on May 10th, his story changed. In this second interview, he stated he had actually entered through the unlocked patio doors at the rear of the apartment, the same entrance Kate would use later when discovering Madeleine missing. Why would someone forget which door they used to check on their children on such a momentous night? If this was simply a mistake made during the stress of the initial interview, why didn't Gerry correct it immediately, rather than days later? This changed narrative creates 2 possibilities. Either Gerry genuinely misremembered which door he used during his first interview, raising questions about the reliability of his recollection, or he deliberately changed his story, raising questions about why he felt the need to do so. The door discrepancy becomes even more significant when we consider its implications for security. If the front door was indeed locked as initially claimed, an intruder would have had only one point of entry, the patio doors. This would narrow the abduction scenario considerably. The invisible witness problem, Jane Tanner's contested sighting. Perhaps no element of the timeline has generated more controversy than Jane Tanner's 9:15 p.m. sighting of a man carrying a child near the McCann apartment. This sighting formed the backbone of the abduction theory for years, until it collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. The most glaring problem is what investigators dubbed the invisible witness paradox. Jane Tanner claimed to have walked past Gerry McCann and Jeremy Wilkins as they chatted on the narrow street, yet neither man recalled seeing her. This creates an impossible scenario. How could Tanner have seen both men clearly enough to identify them, yet somehow remain invisible to them? The street in question, Rua Dr. Francisco Gentil Martins, is approximately 10 feet wide. Given its narrow dimensions and the fact that both men were facing the direction from which Tanner would have approached, it seems implausible that neither would notice her passing by. This discrepancy led Portuguese investigators to question the reliability of Tanner's entire account. If she wasn't actually present at that location at 9:15 p.m., then her sighting of a man carrying a child becomes suspect as well. The Tanner sighting was eventually resolved in 2013 when Scotland Yard identified the man as an innocent British tourist returning from the resort's night creche with his own daughter. This revelation effectively invalidated what had been considered the primary lead in the case for 6 years. The Smith sighting, timing impossibilities. If we accept the timeline as presented, the Smith family's sighting at 10 p.m. creates a nearly impossible scenario for a conventional abduction. The Smiths reported seeing a man carrying a pajama-clad child on Rua da Escola Primaria, a street leading toward the beach, approximately 700 meters from the McCann apartment. This occurred at almost exactly the same moment Kate McCann discovered Madeleine missing. This timing creates a significant problem. If this man was indeed Madeleine's abductor, he would have had to take her from the apartment and travel 700 meters in just minutes, all while carrying a child and avoiding detection. Given the layout of Praia da Luz, with its narrow, winding streets often filled with tourists even in the evening, this would have been remarkably difficult. Furthermore, if the abduction occurred closer to 9:15 p.m., as the Tanner sighting suggested, why would the abductor still be wandering the streets with Madeleine 45 minutes later? This extended exposure would have dramatically increased the risk of detection. The delayed report, 13 days of silence. Adding another layer of complexity to the Smith sighting is the family's delayed reporting of this encounter. Despite witnessing what would become a critical sighting in a high-profile missing child case, the Smith family waited 13 days before contacting authorities. The Smiths remained in Praia da Luz until May 9th, 6 days after Madeleine's disappearance had become international news. During this time, Madeleine's image was everywhere, and the Tanner sighting had been widely publicized. Yet the family did not come forward until May 16th, after they had returned to Ireland. When questioned about this delay, Martin Smith explained they initially didn't connect their sighting to Madeleine's disappearance. This explanation struck investigators as odd, given the massive media coverage and the similarity between what they saw and the widely publicized details of the case. Martin Smith's bombshell identification. The most explosive contradiction emerged 4 months later, in September 2007, when Martin Smith watched television footage of the McCanns returning to the UK from Portugal. As he observed Gerry McCann descending the airplane steps carrying one of his twins, Smith claimed to experience a moment of recognition. Smith subsequently told investigators he was 60–80% certain that the man his family had seen carrying a child at 10 p.m. on May 3rd was Gerry McCann himself. This identification was based on the man's distinctive walking gait, build, and the way he carried the child. This claim created an irreconcilable contradiction in the timeline. Gerry McCann was documented to be at the tapas restaurant at 10 p.m., witnessed by restaurant staff and his 7 friends. If Martin Smith's identification was accurate, the entire timeline as presented by the McCanns and their friends would be undermined. Portuguese investigators found this contradiction significant enough that by September 2007, they formally named Kate and Gerry McCann as arguidos, official suspects, a status that was only lifted when the case was archived in July 2008 for lack of conclusive evidence. I've laid out the major discrepancies in this case, but now I want to hear from you. What do you think happened during those critical 55 minutes? Was it a planned abduction, an opportunistic kidnapping, or something else entirely? Share your theory in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'm genuinely curious about your perspective on these timeline contradictions. The timeline discrepancies we've examined have generated 5 distinct theories about what happened to Madeleine McCann. Each theory attempts to reconcile the contradictions in different ways, and each has been pursued by investigators at various points over the past decade and a half. Let's examine the evidence supporting and challenging each explanation. The planned abduction theory. This theory, embraced by British authorities and the McCanns themselves, suggests Madeleine was targeted by a predator who had been watching the family's movements and routines throughout their vacation. Supporting evidence includes Madeleine's troubling question about crying the previous night, suggesting someone may have entered the apartment on May 2nd as a dry run. The theory also points to reports of a suspicious man seen photographing children at the resort, and several accounts of a stranger testing apartment doors in the days before the disappearance. Former Scotland Yard detective Colin Sutton articulated this theory. The regular checks on the children would have been observed by anyone watching the apartment. The pattern was established, the time between checks was known. However, this theory struggles to explain why an abductor would take only Madeleine and not one of the younger, easier-to-transport twins. It also doesn't account for the lack of forensic evidence in the apartment or the timeline contradictions, particularly the Smith sighting coinciding with Kate's discovery of Madeleine missing. The opportunistic kidnapping theory. This theory suggests Madeleine was taken by someone who happened to notice the apartment's vulnerability and acted on impulse rather than through careful planning. Supporting this view is the unlocked patio door, which provided easy access to anyone passing by. The resort's open layout, with public streets and walkways adjacent to ground-floor apartments, created an environment where someone could notice the McCanns leaving for dinner and seize the opportunity. Former FBI profiler Jim Clemente supported this theory. Most child abductions are crimes of opportunity. The perpetrator sees a vulnerability and exploits it quickly. The challenge for this theory is explaining how an opportunistic abductor would know which bed contained which child in a darkened room, and how they would exit with a child without being seen by any of the numerous people in the area that evening, including Gerry McCann and Jeremy Wilkins, who were standing nearby at the presumed time of abduction. The burglar theory. This theory proposes that a burglar broke into apartment 5A intending to steal valuables, was surprised by Madeleine waking up, and took her either to prevent identification or for more sinister purposes. Supporting this explanation is a spike in burglaries reported in Praia da Luz in the months before May 2007. Portuguese police documented several break-ins at the Ocean Club Resort, with some burglars entering through windows. The theory also offers an explanation for why the bedroom window was found open with its shutter raised, possibly the burglar's entry or exit point. However, this theory is undermined by the fact that nothing was stolen from the apartment, not even valuable items left in plain sight. It also doesn't explain how a burglar could exit through a small window while carrying a child without leaving forensic traces. The controversial parental involvement theory. This theory, which dominated Portuguese investigators' thinking by September 2007, suggests the McCanns were somehow involved in their daughter's disappearance, and the subsequent timeline was constructed to cover this up. Proponents point to the cadaver and blood dogs that allegedly alerted in apartment 5A and in the McCanns' rental car, obtained 25 days after Madeleine's disappearance. They also cite the timeline contradictions, particularly Gerry's changing door story and Martin Smith's identification, as evidence of fabrication. Former Portuguese detective Gonçalo Amaral, who led the initial investigation, wrote in his controversial book, "The supposed abduction was a staged simulation." This theory faces significant challenges, including the lack of conclusive forensic evidence linking the McCanns to any harm befalling their daughter. It also requires believing that the couple could have concealed a body and later moved it while under intense media scrutiny. The Christian Bruckner connection. The most recent theory focuses on German national Christian Bruckner, who was living in Praia da Luz in 2007 and has since been convicted of multiple sexual offenses. German prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters announced in June 2020, "We are assuming that the girl is dead. We have a suspect in Germany against whom proceedings are underway." Supporting this theory is Bruckner's criminal history, his presence in the area, cell phone data placing him near the Ocean Club on the night of May 3rd, and a reported confession he made to an acquaintance. The challenge for this theory is explaining how Bruckner fits into the established timeline, particularly given the Smith sighting at 10 p.m. German authorities have yet to formally charge Bruckner, despite their public confidence in his involvement. Each of these theories attempts to make sense of the same set of facts, but interprets the timeline discrepancies in fundamentally different ways. The planned and opportunistic abduction theories accept the timeline largely as presented by the McCanns and their friends, with the contradictions attributed to stress and misremembering. The burglar theory focuses on the physical evidence of the open window. The parental involvement theory views the contradictions as evidence of deliberate deception. And the Bruckner theory attempts to overlay a new suspect onto the existing timeline. After 15 years of investigation, millions of pounds spent and countless leads pursued, these competing theories remain unreconciled, each with its supporters and detractors, each with its strengths and weaknesses. 15 years after Madeleine McCann vanished from apartment 5A, her case remains officially unsolved. The investigation has traversed 3 countries, consumed over $11 million in resources, and generated more than 8,000 potential sightings across 101 countries. Yet those critical 55 minutes between 9:05 p.m. and 10 p.m. on May 3, 2007 continue to conceal as much as they reveal. The current status of the case exists in a state of fragmented jurisdiction and competing priorities. In the United Kingdom, Operation Grange, the Metropolitan Police's dedicated investigation, continues to classify the case as a missing persons inquiry rather than a homicide, though with significantly reduced resources since its 2011 peak. The Portuguese investigation was officially reopened in 2013 after being archived in 2008, but progress reports are rare and often contradictory to the UK approach. Meanwhile, German authorities have pursued their own investigation focused on Christian Bruckner. In 2020, the Brunswick Public Prosecutor's Office took the unprecedented step of announcing they were investigating Bruckner for Madeleine's murder, stating they had concrete evidence she was dead. Yet as of 2023, no formal charges have been filed against Bruckner in connection with Madeleine's disappearance, despite his incarceration for other offences. This 3-way jurisdictional split has created a situation where different countries are simultaneously pursuing different theories based on different interpretations of the same timeline, a fitting metaphor for a case defined by its contradictions. The McCann case has fundamentally transformed how missing children cases are handled worldwide. Its impact extends far beyond the specifics of Madeleine's disappearance, creating lasting changes in 4 key areas. First, it revolutionized the use of media in missing persons cases. The McCann's unprecedented media campaign, which included celebrities, the Pope, and pioneering use of social media, created a template that other families have followed. The case demonstrated how public awareness could be maintained for years, not just the critical first 48 hours. Second, it changed police protocols for cross-border investigations. The initial communication failures between British and Portuguese authorities led to the development of new international cooperation frameworks, particularly within the European Union. These protocols have since been applied to numerous other cases involving missing children across national boundaries. Third, it altered how hotels and resorts approach child safety. Many vacation properties worldwide now offer enhanced security measures, monitored childcare services, and stricter protocols directly in response to the weaknesses exposed at the Ocean Club Resort. Finally, it spotlighted the psychological impact on communities where children disappear. Praia da Luz experienced economic devastation in the years following 2007, with tourism plummeting and property values collapsing, a cautionary tale for other communities facing similar tragedies. Despite these broader impacts, the central questions about Madeleine's fate remain unanswered. If she was abducted, how did someone enter and exit apartment 5A without leaving forensic traces? Why take Madeleine but not one of the easier-to-transport twins? And how does the Smith sighting at 10 p.m. fit into this scenario? If the timeline as presented by the McCanns and their friends contains significant contradictions, What explains these inconsistencies? Are they the result of stress and misremembering during a traumatic event, or do they point to something more deliberate? If Christian Bruckner was involved, how did he intersect with the established timeline? What evidence beyond his presence in Praia da Luz connects him specifically to apartment 5A on May 3rd? Perhaps most troubling is the possibility that the truth lies somewhere between these competing narratives, in a complex interplay of coincidence, opportunity, and circumstance that may never be fully unraveled. What remains certain is that somewhere in those 55 minutes lies the answer to what happened to Madeleine McCann. The timeline, with all its contradictions and discrepancies, continues to be both the greatest clue and the greatest obstacle to resolving this case. As we conclude this examination, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey through one of criminology's most perplexing timelines. If you found this analysis valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Criminal Instinct for more in-depth explorations of complex cases. More importantly, I want to hear your thoughts. After reviewing the timeline and its discrepancies, which theory do you find most compelling? Do you see contradictions I've missed? Or perhaps you have insights into how these disparate pieces might fit together? Share your perspective in the comments below. Your observation might be the one that helps us see this case in a new light. Until next time, remember that in the world of true crime, timelines don't just tell us when things happened. They often reveal why they happened, and sometimes why the official story doesn't add up.